Today, we're going to deconstruct a pretty controversial text by Abdullah Boufim from his book, The Danger of Magian Shi'ism. Now, we're not here to debate his claims. Instead, think of us as architects. We're just here to see exactly how he builds his argument, brick by brick.
Right out of the gate, the text throws down this incredibly provocative question. Are Shia Muslims or Majus? Now, Majus is an old term for Zoroastrians. By asking this, the author isn't just looking for an answer. Nope. He's setting the entire stage for the argument that's about to unfold.
So just so we're all on the same page, our focus here is purely on the structure of the argument. We're going to look at how the author uses foundational religious texts as the building blocks for his case. We're interested in the how, not in debating the what.
Okay, so the author's entire case really stands on three distinct pillars. Let's dig into the first one, which deals with a very sensitive topic: the status of the Prophet Muhammad's wives.
This verse from the Quran is the cornerstone of his first point. On the surface, it draws a pretty simple parallel, right? Good men are meant for good women. But just watch how the author takes this principle and turns it into a logical weapon.
You know, what's really interesting here is how he builds this perfect three-step syllogism. First, step one, he starts with that Quranic premise we just saw: good men are for good women. Simple enough. Then, step two, he applies this directly to the Prophet, saying, well, as the best of men, his wives have to be the best of women. And that leads him straight to step three, his conclusion. From his point of view, slandering the wives isn't just an insult, it's a rejection of the Quran's own logic, and that, to him, is an act that puts you outside the faith.
All right, let's move on to the second pillar of his argument. Here, the author shifts his focus from the Prophet's immediate family to his wider circle, his closest companions.
For this second point, he zeroes in on this very specific phrase from a Quranic verse about the Prophet's companions. The key part is that line, that he may enrage by them the disbelievers. He essentially takes this phrase and turns it into a kind of litmus test for who is and who isn't a believer.
So you can see the logic he's building. Step 1. The Quran says the companions enrage disbelievers. Step 2. The author claims that Shias are, in fact, enraged by the companions. And, therefore, Step 3. He concludes that Shia must be the disbelievers mentioned in what he calls the explicit text of the Quran. It's a very direct and very controversial equation he's making.
The third and final pillar of the argument is, well, it's probably the most fundamental one. It goes beyond people and gets right to the integrity of the Quran itself. First, the author lays down a baseline that's universally accepted in mainstream Islam, and he uses this verse to do it. It's a divine promise that the Quran will be protected from any changes. He sets this up as an undeniable truth before he makes his next move. And this is the absolute core of his third argument. He creates what he sees as a totally irreconcilable conflict. On one side of the scale, you have the Quran's promise of its own divine protection. On the other side, he puts the accusation that Shia believe the text has been altered. For the author, these two ideas just can't exist together. One of them has to be false. Okay, so he's laid out his three arguments about the wives, the companions, and the Quran. Now he's ready to pull them all together and deliver his final verdict. But to really get his final move, we need to quickly define this crucial term, takfir. It's the act of one Muslim declaring another to be a non-believer, or a kafir. And let me tell you, this is not just some theological squabble. It is an incredibly serious charge with huge real-world consequences. The author then brings in this hadith, a saying of the Prophet. And you got to notice the warning in it. This accusation of disbelief is so powerful that if you make it falsely, it actually boomerangs right back onto you, the accuser. And that is exactly how he uses it, with what you could call a boomerang logic. He claims that Shias engage in takfir by calling the companions disbelievers. Therefore, in his reading of that hadith, the charge of disbelief automatically recoils and lands right back on them. So to quickly recap, the author's whole case is built on these three pillars of accusation, and each one is constructed from his specific interpretation of key religious texts: slandering the wives, condemning the companions, and denying the Quran's integrity. And that brings us to his final, unmistakable conclusion. This is the capstone on the entire structure we've been deconstructing. As you can see from his own words, there's absolutely no ambiguity. For the author, these three actions are red lines that determine who is and who is not a Muslim. And that wraps up our structural analysis. But when you step back from this one text, it forces you to confront a much, much bigger question, doesn't it? How does the way we choose to interpret foundational, sacred texts continue to draw boundaries,
define who we are, and even fuel conflict in our world today.